We here at TYT are not big fans of Louie Gohmert. We don't like when he talks about hobbit holes, when he implicates the UN in conspiracies to take down the US government. And I also don't like it when he talks about welfare. Now, he was recently on the House floor talking about the subject. He's got a couple of quotes we want to cover, but first let's hear Louie Gohmert himself.
In the 60s, the federal government, desiring to help poor moms who were dealing with deadbeat dads that weren't helping, decided, we'll help. We'll give a check for every child you can have out of wedlock. And I keep wondering, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't it have been better in the 60s to say, you know what? We realize you're dealing with a deadbeat dad. We know you'd be better off with a high school education. So instead of giving you a check for every child you can have out of wedlock, how about if we give you some daycare for that child so you finish high school and get your own job?
The gentleman's time has expired.
That would have made more difference for more Americans, and with that I yield back.
So you'll just have to trust me that that video was recorded in the last couple of days. It sounds like it comes out of the 80s. He's actually there on the House floor railing against welfare queens. What decade is it? And so he said a couple of other things. It's not just that he doesn't like welfare, but welfare and welfare abuse is why Louie Gohmert actually got into politics in the first place. This is what he said. If it weren't for the policies in this war on poverty declared 50 years ago, it may well be that I would have never run for Congress. Because what got me thinking about it first as a state district judge back in Texas was seeing more and more young women, single women coming before me, single moms charged with welfare fraud. One woman had had 15 kids, didn't even know where they all were. That was the most that I ever dealt with. It began to really eat away with me that in the 60s, the federal government, desiring to help poor moms who were dealing with deadbeat dads, decided, we'll give a check for every child you have out of wedlock. I've got a couple of problems with that. First of all, he's talking about how this was really eating away at him in the 60s. Like, this is a big issue. Louie Gohmert, I found out in doing a little bit of research on Wikipedia, was born in 1953. That means that during the 60s, he was between 7 and 17 years old. He's an oddly astute viewer of news if he was that worried about welfare fraud when he was 8 or 9 years old. And so I have a problem with what he said there, just because it doesn't seem actually factual. But the bigger problem is that he's talking about welfare fraud, and specifically the idea that's been trotted out for decades by conservatives that women are purposefully having children just so that they can get a bigger check or get a check in the first place. And that's something that they often just say. Wouldn't it be great if we had some actual research into whether there's any evidence that that actually happens? Oh wait, we do. I found it easily by searching on the internet. Back in the 90s, researchers at Rutgers compared birth rates between thousands of welfare recipients and a control group that did not receive any welfare, and they found that there was no statistical difference whatsoever between the two groups when it comes to birth rates. And I know that some people, maybe even liberals, hate when I bring up these studies, but the idea that you can simply go up there and say they're having kids so they can get money, something that seems so on its face absurd, is not outside of the range of science. Science can actually investigate that. You can ask these questions and find answers using actual data about Americans, and they did that back in the 90s. It's been 18 years, maybe. He hasn't had time to look that up. But more specifically about Louie Gohmert, the reason I have a problem with this is that's why he got into politics. Like, think about all the potential things that could drive a person to be interested in politics in the first place, or to think, I need to be a part of that. Like, maybe you see a war that you think is a waste of money, is immoral, it's killing innocent people. I got to get elected so I can stop this war. Something like that. That would seem understandable. The idea that these single moms, these poor moms, are purposefully pumping out children so they can get bigger checks, that's the great moral outrage that launched Louie Gohmert onto the national stage. That should seem ridiculous to him, but he's a pretty dim guy. It should at the very least seem ridiculous to us as people who have to consume Louie Gohmert political products. So that bothers me. Not a fan of Louie Gohmert. Wish he had stayed out of politics, although perhaps as one of 435 members of Congress, he's doing less damage to the country than he would if he was still a judge in Texas.